Chapter 12. 2 hours after Ivy's investigation of the strange and deadly weakness in the net, Aiden Kai, leader of the Arrow Squad, stood in an office awash in the sunshine present on this side of the world, and listened to her report, then offered any assistance he or the squad could provide. Even as he spoke, he knew there was little the Arrows could do except protect the ES and attempt to rapidly patch up any tears in the psychic fabric that kept millions alive. This was a battlefield for which they simply did not have the right weapons. As he ended the call with Ivy, he considered the other items on his agenda. The Trinity Accord was at the top. The Ming situation a serious issue that could cause real-world violence if not handled correctly. There was also the case of Layla Savia, one of Black Sea's vanished members. Mina Levesque had updated Zyra directly on the message from the kidnapped marine biologist. Aiden's commander and the Black Sea Alpha were fledgling friends, both women as dangerous as one another. The fact that Zyra and Vasich had brought 3 of Mina's lost people home also had the Black Sea Alpha far more apt to trust the squad. "You understand what it is to treasure a child's life," she'd said to Aiden once, her eyes as black as night rather than the clear hazel he was used to seeing. "It gives us common ground on which to stand." While Aiden was already calculating how the squad could help in the retrieval of the Black Sea woman, it wasn't because Layla Savia was an innocent. Aiden couldn't think with his heart. He had to think first of the well-being of his arrows, his strategy a long-term one. The squad needed to continue building relationships with other strong groups. Such relationships would keep their vulnerable alive should the world ever turn against the most dangerous predators in their midst. That thought in mind, he sent an updated alert on the Black Sea situation to his men and women, then made a calm call to Lucas Hunter. "Lucas," he said when the Alpha answered on what appeared to be a small screen device, the view beyond him of smoothly polished wooden logs. The sunlight made it difficult to see Lucas's face. "I received your note." In it, the Leopard Alpha had suggested they send out a simple vote on the Ming situation to all those who had already signed the accord. The result could well decide the future of Trinity. "You agree?" Lucas's shoulders moved under the black of his t-shirt as he shifted to a more shaded spot. The claw-like markings on the right side of his face came into sudden, sharp focus. "Yes," Aiden said in reply to the Alpha's question. "We can't move forward while Ming's trying to poison Trinity. I'll take care of getting the vote out." The leopard male's eyes glittered a green so feral. Aiden knew he was no longer looking at the human part of Lucas, no matter the skin he wore. "Your people pick up anything else about Naya?" "No, but it's possible some data I just received is related," Aiden said. "An unnamed party was searching for a mercenary team 5 weeks to a month ago. The action was or is supposed to be in San Francisco." Lucas snarled but managed to keep his voice civil as he said, "Thank you, Aiden. I'll update you immediately if we discover who took up the offer." Clearly coldly furious at the implications of the information Aiden's people had discovered, the DarkRiver Alpha signed off with a nod. Alone in his office again, Aiden considered Trinity. It had been his idea, and while he still believed deeply in the agreement, it was becoming obvious the divisions in the world ran far too deep for this to ever be a smooth journey. You can lead a horse to water but you can't make it drink, even if it's dying of thirst. Not when it would rather fight the zebra on the other side. Zyra had heard the human saying while she was posted in Venice, muttered it to Aiden one night, and added her own pithy coda. Yet, despite her disdain for those who were causing problems, she remained his staunchest supporter. "You'll do it, Aiden," she told him 2 nights earlier, the midnight dark of her eyes looking down into his as she rose up beside him on her elbow. "You always do what you put your mind to, even if it takes years." A sudden, narrow-eyed smile from his most lethal commander, the lamplight throwing a warm glow on smooth skin a shade somewhere between cream and sun-kissed brown, the color beautifully changeable. It all depended on the season and the strength of the sun. "Look at me. Took you decades but now here I am, naked in your bed. Anyone who bets against Aiden Kai is as big an idiot as those horses." His cheeks creasing at the memory of her acerbic words, Aiden left his office and walked out into the sunlit landscape beyond. The valley, as the squad had taken to calling this isolated piece of land cradled between the craggy peaks of 2 sets of mountains, was no longer as barren or as Spartan as it had once been. Newly built cabins stood in small groupings, while pathways curved gently in and around those homes and across the valley. But though the newly planted gardens were blooming and the sun brilliant, he heard no childish voices, saw no young arrows in the play area. A glance at his watch confirmed they were currently in afternoon classes. Outsiders would see the arrow teaching structure and declare it far too restrictive with too little room for innovation, but those outsiders didn't understand that when a child could explode another's mind with a simple passing tantrum, he or she needed walls, wanted safety and predictability. Paradoxical as it was, such boundaries made the child feel more free. The restrictions would be eased as each child became increasingly self-sufficient in terms of controlling his or her abilities. That step had already been authorized and implemented for the teenagers he saw studying in an outside green area when he walked around the corner. Because while structure was important, so was the ability to make independent decisions and the capacity to think creatively. These children wouldn't be forced into a path as Aiden and his brethren had been, but many would end up working in the blood-soaked shadows nonetheless. It was a dark truth for children born with violent psychic power. Silence or not, so long as those of the Psi race were defined by their minds, the Psi-net would need the hunters, the ones who kept the innocents safe. Like all power, psychic power had a flip side. Changelings could turn feral. Psi could turn murderously insane. What was no longer inevitable was being a lone hunter in the darkness. Every arrow had a home here, had family. Even their most broken. Aiden. Stopping to speak to the teens when they hesitantly called his name, Aiden listened to their feedback on cooperative learning as the sun heated his back through the black of the t-shirt he wore in place of his arrow uniform. "I'll leave you to your work," he said after 10 minutes. "Don't forget that your year group is supervising the under 5s this afternoon." It had been Remy, alpha of the Rainfire Leopards, who'd suggested Aiden utilize the teens to look after the youngest in the squad. It was how changeling packs worked, older children often in charge of younger ones. The arrangement built bonds across age lines, blurring the boundaries that had so often kept arrows siloed in defined boxes. The same applied to contact between children and elders. Aiden's parents were technically elders, but he couldn't see either Marjorie Kai or Naoshi A's interacting with the young without causing irreparable harm to their soft hearts. Yuri, though he was a number of years younger at 47, was proving a better mentor in that respect. Aiden hadn't expected it of the remote arrow who'd lived more than 4 decades in silence, but Yuri had proven to have endless patience when teaching a child. And perhaps, just perhaps, those children were teaching Yuri too. The truth was that after Edward's suicide, Aiden worried about many of the senior arrows, including the man who was one of Zyra's most trusted people. He knew Yuri had struggled with the fall of silence, unsure where he fit in this new world. Yesterday, however, Aiden had happened upon an unexpected sight. Yuri seated at an outdoor table with Carolina standing on the bench beside him, the 6-year-old's hand on his shoulder and her pale blonde hair tied back as she peered intently at the organizer he was repairing. Her concentration had been fierce, her forehead scrunched up. "I can do it, Yuri," she'd said. "I can. Please, can I try?" It was impossible for such a scenario to have taken place prior to the fall of silence, but if it had, Yuri would have acted on his training and shut down the child's request for the logical reason that Carolina didn't yet have the manual dexterity to complete the delicate repair. But yesterday, Yuri had given the 6-year-old the tiny laser tool, then held her soft hand steady with his scarred and leathery one as she made the repairs. His expression had never altered, but the fact that he'd stayed there in the sunshine, nurturing a small child's confidence, it spoke volumes. A single act of kindness can change a life. Zyra had said that to more than one arrow, and it had slowly become an unofficial motto among the adults. When an arrow who'd never experienced parental affection, the vast majority of the squad, didn't know what to do or how to react to a child's need, they defaulted to whatever seemed the kindest response, even if that response went against their training. Aiden didn't think Zyra realized the staggering impact of her words. Adult arrows like structure too, especially in this strange new territory they were attempting to navigate, this family they were building. Music whispered on the wind, carried to him through the open windows of a classroom, art of any kind, a gift that had returned to the Psi after over 100 years. The century of silence meant they had no teachers. Humans and changelings did. But the squad would never permit anyone into the valley they didn't know inside out. So the children learned from recorded lessons. From the sounds Aiden could hear at present, they were enthusiastic if not in tune. Smile deepening, he went looking for Vasich and Zyra. The most important people in his life were both in the valley this morning, and he wasn't surprised to find them together. His mate and his best friend hadn't always been friends themselves, but these days they often ganged up on Aiden when they believed he needed a break. Today, however, they were discussing a troubled telekinetic teenager, who needed help of a kind only one adult TK was qualified to provide. "Stefan," Zyra said to Aiden when he came to stand with his body touching hers, "do you think he has the time to take on a trainee?" "I haven't spoken to him in over 2 weeks, Aiden said, in agreement with their choice of mentor. Stefan might have been termed defective during training and transferred out of the squad, but the Arrows considered him one of their own. Vasich? Will Stefan's current workload on Alaris allow him time to handle a trainee? Last he'd heard, the deep-sea station was in the midst of a refit. Vasich flexed the fingers of his newest prosthetic arm as if testing it, the skin of the unit a gleaming obsidian that meshed flawlessly with his arrow uniform. I'm not sure, but I'm seeing him later this week for a telekinetic sparring session. I'll ask. A born teleporter, Vasich could go to the deep-sea station without problem. To him, it was no different than teleporting to another country. There was no issue with a change in air pressure either, since the pressure inside Alaris was identical to that on the surface. Not that it would have bothered Vasich regardless. Unlike everyone on the planet but those capable of teleportation across that vast a distance, he'd suffer no ill effects from a sudden change in air pressure. Researchers had been grappling with that little quirk since the first time a teleporter figured out what he could do, courtesy of a scuba diving emergency. See if you can judge his mental state, Aiden said. He might not be alone, but he's still stuck under tons of water on a daily basis. He'd always considered Stefan's choice of work an odd one, given the psychological flaw that had gotten the other man kicked out of the squad's training program. You know, he's as stable as a rock has been for years. Vasich's smile was more suggestion than form. At least he can finally openly share the reason why. Aiden couldn't argue with any part of Vasich's statement. Check anyway, ask if he's happy to remain on Alaris. The fall of silence had changed everything. There was no reason for Stefan to stay underwater if he didn't want to be there. I will. Nodding at his friend's prosthetic, Aiden said. I could swear I saw you wearing a prosthetic with a metallic finish yesterday. I was, Vasich confirmed. But that's the piece Samuel uses to assess various components. This, he flexed the obsidian hand again, is his newest creation. Any more effective than his previous one? The gifted scientist had gone into a deep funk when the last prosthetic had shorted out in sparks, the wrist falling away from the forearm. Oh, it's very effective, Zyra said, a biting amusement in her tone. Show him, Vasich. Vasich glanced around before walking over to pick up a branch. His hand clamped around it. Dust drifted into the air. See, very effective. Zyra's comment was dead serious on the surface, but not so useful if Vasich wants to stroke Ivy's hair or hold her close, or pick up a glass to take a drink. Vasich closed his prosthetic hand around a rock. It came to the same dusty end as the branch. I think I've proven this grasp has only one setting. Crush everything dead. His friend was amused too. Aiden realized. Rain will be disappointed, he said as Vasich began to remove the prosthetic. Floating it neatly to the ground using his TK, the teleporter pinned up the sleeve of his shirt with his free hand. Samuel won't give up until he either dies or gets it right. Last time a prototype failed. He pulled at his hair until it stuck out in all directions, then declared he was Ahab and my prosthetic was his whale. You've definitively decided on a prosthetic? Aiden hadn't expected that. Last time we talked, you were leaning against it. I don't need one, Vasich admitted. Eva adapted. Sleeve neatly pinned up. He teleported away the malfunctioning unit. But Samuel saved my life and oddly enough, this obsession helps keep him anchored. He usually only requires 3 or 4 hours of my time a month. It's little enough payment for the life he gave me. Does he realize you no longer want a replacement for your biological arm? Zyra put her hands on her hips, clearly annoyed on behalf of a man she'd ignored for most of her life. And if he succeeds, what then? You'll be stuck with it. Unexpected humor in Vasich's response. I'm certain Samuel doesn't care if I actually use the prosthetic. Getting a unit to function with my damage systems is his whale. Once he does that, I'll fall off his radar and he'll find a new obsession. Aiden was in full agreement. Vasich was a puzzle to be solved for Samuel Rain. That didn't mean Aiden wouldn't protect the man for the rest of his life. Mad genius or not, Rain had saved the life of Aiden's best friend. That was a debt that could never be repaid. The Black Sea situation, he said into the undemanding silence among the three of them. No new data on the kidnapped marine biologist from our sources. Changelings say the same. Seeing Zyra's body tense to trembling point, he put his hand on her lower back. It was a silent reminder that she was no longer a child in a cage, that she stood with her lover and their friend underneath a sunlit sky. Free. A dark-eyed glance from his deadly commander before she took a deep breath, and he felt her muscles begin to unlock. I'm assuming you've had no success locking onto the Canadian cheap electric symbol, he said to Vasich. The other man shook his head. Judd was right. There are too many identical hits on the CCE logo, and I can't zero in on Layla's face because of the damage from the scarring. The winter gray of his eyes held an Arctic chill. Zyra's point on this, Aiden told his best friend. Get all intel to her. An immediate nod from Vasich. While the teleporter wasn't aware of the details of Zyra's childhood, he'd been with her during the last rescue, understood her hunger to free the trapped. Trinity, Vasich said as sounds reached them from another part of the valley, where it appeared a martial arts class was in session. Holding. Fragile. There's too much divisive history in the mix. A summit would be useful. Vasich hunkered down to pet a small white dog who'd run back from his adventures across the valley. As he did, the wedding band he wore on his right ring finger caught the light, creating a golden spark. If not for the obvious risk. Yes. Zyra folded her arms, set her feet apart. It would generate a sitting target for the consortium or anyone else who might want to take out a large percentage of the major powers in the world. Aiden considered Vasich's words, thought about Zyra's on-point risk assessment, felt the germ of an idea. We turn the consortium's tactics back on them, he said. No big central summit but small ones that introduce the key people in each region to one another. Limiting the spread of information about the meetings, while achieving cohesion. Vasich nodded slowly. In Venice, Zyra said, her eyes faintly narrowed in thought. The Human Alliance and I had an understanding. It kept the peace. She bent to pet Rabbit when the dog wandered over, tail wagging triple time. Simply knowing that your neighbor is open to dialogue could eliminate a large number of localized problems. I'll start testing the idea, Aiden said, then glanced at Vasich. How's Tavish? In keeping with the squad's decision to place arrow children into families with active duty arrows, the young telekinetic boy was now part of Ivy and Vasich's family unit, a unit that included the dog who, at present, was lying on his back, tongue lolling in ecstasy and legs in the air while Zyra rubbed his belly. Settling into the orchard. Vasich's voice held a deep, quiet joy when he spoke of his home. He spends a lot of time with grandfather. Then Aiden thought the child was in good hands. Zai Zen, who in truth was actually Vasich's great-grandfather, had more wisdom in his bones than most people would ever gain, not even if they lived 2 lifetimes. Can you stay? Zyra asked Aiden. We could spar. Aiden loved pitching his wits and tactical skills against Zyra's, but he had to shake his head today. I have a meeting with Devraj Santos in 5. The Forgotten had requested the squad's assistance in dealing with the wild new psychic abilities cropping up in their children. Aiden was certain the change had begun even earlier, specifically with Santos's generation, but the leader of the Forgotten wasn't giving away anything about his own abilities. However, after his conversation with Ivy, Aiden had another critical issue to discuss with Dev. The Forgotten's psychic network was a vibrant, living thing in comparison to the deadly disintegration pulling the Psynet apart at the seams. It was possible the other man had useful insights Aiden could pass on to the ES. Can you give me a lift? He said to Vasich. Or shall I ask Narita? I'll pick you up in 3 minutes. Vasich ported out with Rabbit, leaving Aiden and Zyra alone. At which point the woman who was Aiden's hauled him close with a grip on his t-shirt, and proceeded to kiss the life out of him. You've become an expert in that. He telepathed to her when his brain cells started functioning again. We've been practicing enough. Inside his mind she was black fire. In front of him she was kiss-swollen lips and a possessive touch, and icy determination. I'm seeing Miena later today. Be careful. Aiden cupped the side of her face. So delicate were her bones, in stark contrast to the intensity of her will. The consortium might have gone under but they're only hibernating waiting for a chance, and they know how important you are to me. They also know I fight like a berserker. Zyra's smile was all teeth. After the last assassin I took down, they're going to have a serious recruiting problem looking for someone to hunt me. Aiden thought of the recording he'd seen of Zyra with the point of a blade touching the assassin's eye. She'd been all cold control on the surface while she fought a primal battle within. She'd won that battle, hadn't given in to the rage that lived within her. And she'd made her point. Do not mess with an arrow, especially this petite arrow with her dark hair and midnight eyes and dangerous walk. Be careful anyway, he said, his heart right there for her to see. I need you. Zyra was the only person in the entire world who belonged first to him. Aiden. Zyra touched her fingers to his lips, the ruby in her ring a silent representation of the flame that lived within her. You stay safe too, or I'll kill you. Aiden felt laughter shake his shoulders. Order heard and understood, Commander. Good. Sliding one hand to his nape, Zyra tugged him down. Now kiss me again before Vasich returns. Letters to Nina. From the Private Diaries of Father Xavier Perez. February 14, 2074. Nina. It's been 10 months now since the Psy came. 10 months since I watched you jump into the water. 10 months since I promised I'd be right behind you. I wasn't. I'm so sorry, Nina. I fought to keep you safe, to keep them from knowing where you'd gone. I was no coward, I promise you this. I'm not alive and writing this letter because I hid. I fought Nina. I fought so hard. They took us down one by one with telepathic blows. The bodies of those we loved fell on me. When I rose to consciousness, they were heavy atop me. And I knew they'd saved my life. Because of my younger brother and Jorge, the soldiers missed the fact I was still alive, still had a pulse. I live because of them. And yet here I sit in a bar drinking away my life because what use is it to be alive when I'm alone, without God, without family, without friends, without you? I would do anything, fight anyone if only you were here. But you're gone and I've forsaken God for his cruelty. Chapter 13. 48 hours after Aiden first told Lucas of the possible threat to Naya, DarkRiver had upgraded all its security precautions regarding their young. The panther inside him in a much calmer mood now that he knew his cub and all the cubs under his watch were well protected. Lucas had far more patience for dealing with the shaky edifice that was Trinity. Aiden's getting ready to test intimate Trinity summits that would act as introductions between various groups, he told Vaughn. The DarkRiver Sentinel was sprawled in a chair on the other side of Lucas's desk at the PAX Chinatown HQ. With amber hair tied in a neat queue at his nape and eyes more cat than man, Lucas's closest friend wasn't involved in Trinity. Politics wasn't really Vaughn's strong suit, but like all of Lucas's Sentinels, he was highly intelligent. Scanning the memo after Lucas turned the whisper-thin computer screen toward him, Vaughn shook his head. Tell him to nix the idea of planning each of these summits ahead of time. Set up a trustworthy team to throw things together with an hour or two of notice max. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Hard to get people together that quickly. So it takes longer to make the connections, but if there are no plans, then no one can hunt down the attendees as a group. It was the answer of a predator. You're right. Far better, he realized, to go slow than to rush and give the enemy exactly what it wanted. My work here is done. Vaughn rose to his feet with feline grace, a smile in his eyes that had become less and less rare in the years since he'd found his FSI mate. Before that, Vaughn had been a loner even in the midst of a pack. A loyal friend, a trusted sentinel, but always holding himself a little separate. Part of that was his jaguar nature, but part of it had been the echo of a soul-searing grief. Hello, Miss Naya, the jaguar said now, reaching down to pick up the tiny cub who'd scampered into the room. Lucas's panther growled in welcome inside him. In truth, his cub's scamper was more attempted scamper. But she was so excited at being able to shift forms that she did it every chance she got. Needless to say, keeping her in clothes had become a losing proposition. Good thing that changelings were used to naked babies scrambling gleefully around. This baby had been in the nursery next door. Must have snuck through the connecting door into the offices. Not that anyone tried too hard to keep the cubs out. The only time that door was locked was when they were in meetings with business associates, who weren't trusted enough for DarkRiver to be carefree with its children. Business trust was a far different beast from the trust that came with being family. Allowing Vaughn to hold her against his chest with one capable hand, Naya purred. She loved the jaguar. Careful. Lucas's heart ached at the sound of his cub's happiness. She'll be scamming you for chocolate next. Vaughn chuckled, using one finger to rub the top of Naya's head. I'm heading home for a run before I meet up with Faith. Naya roared, or tried to. It came out more a kittenish rumble. Grinning, Lucas translated. I think she wants to come. But you won't be doing much running with her. Vaughn's eyes caught his, the shade near gold. You okay if I take her? I've got the jet cycle, but I can switch to an SUV. Fighting his overprotective instincts, Lucas said. She loves the jet cycle. Vaughn was a skilled driver, and the jetcycle's maneuverability gave it an advantage should anyone attempt to follow Vaughn and Naya with the aim of doing harm. Lucas wouldn't steal joy from his child in the name of keeping her safe. Yeah, Vaughn agreed. She's a little speed demon. He put Naya on his shoulder, where she curled up as if she'd been doing it forever, wrapping her tail around his neck to anchor herself. I'll run in human form, hold her when she's had enough. Message me when and where you want me to drop her off. He tugged playfully on Naya's tail. Come on, Miss Naya. Let's go run. But first we'll sign you out of the nursery so the teachers don't worry. Naya growled and made bye-bye noises at Lucas as Vaughn walked out the door. Lucas trusted his friend unconditionally, yet he still had the urge to lunge up and haul her into his arms. It took teeth-gritting will to fight the primal desire. She was safe. Vaughn was a lethal predatory changeling. He'd fight to the death to protect her, and it was good for the jaguar to open his heart to such a small, helpless packmate. Lucas hoped Naya's determined love of Vaughn would help the other man heal from the staggering loss that had devastated him as a child. Lucas's phone buzzed. Looking away from the door through which Vaughn and Naya had disappeared, he answered to find his mate on the other end. Of course she'd picked up on his silent fight against instincts formed when he'd been a young boy helpless to protect his parents from a deadly attack. He'd been tortured too, but Lucas could have borne that. It had been watching his parents die in front of him that had marked his psyche in a permanent way. Sasha understood the brutal competing drives inside him. "I'm fine," he told her. "Vaughn's bringing Naya home. Where do you want him to drop her off?" "The Airy. I'll be back by the time he actually turns up." Sasha's smile was in her voice. "You know he kidnaps her for hours and she's a very happy kidnappee. He lets her finger paint the walls of his den, that's why. Their cub always turned up squeaky clean, without a speck of paint on her. But Naya couldn't keep a secret. Forget about walls, Faith told me she came home last time to find Naya finger painting Vaughn." Chuckling at the idea of the quiet, intense sentinel happily acting as the canvas for an enthusiastic toddler, Lucas asked, "How's the lesson going?" Sasha was up in snowdancer territory, working with Toby Lauren. "He's more reticent than usual. Lara warned me, said that he might be in the first stages of teenage boyitis. I remember that phase. Being surly is a requirement. I can't imagine Toby surly." A pause, a rustle. "I'd better go. He's getting restless." Hanging up, Lucas forwarded Vaughn's suggested changes to the summit idea to Aiden, then got up and headed out to a work site. He needed to stretch his muscles, see how the project was going. It would also stop him from worrying constantly about Naya. Sometimes an alpha had to let go and trust his pack to watch over that which mattered most. Having driven the jet cycle to DarkRiver's Yosemite territory with the delighted Naya safely tucked up inside his zippered leather synth jacket, only her head poking out and her eyes squinting against the wind that ruffled her fur, Vaughn parked the vehicle in a designated spot just inside the forest. Unlike when he traveled alone or with Faith, he'd logged this trip with Jamie and Desiree. The two senior soldiers were in charge of keeping track of pack children moving in and out of the city. No cub was going to disappear and not be immediately missed. Still straddling the powerful body of the jet cycle, Vaughn used his phone to check in, informing his packmates that Naya was safe inside the heart of DarkRiver territory. He'd ensured they had no tail, his senses on high alert. Swinging his leg over the jet cycle after sliding away his phone, he spoke to the cub who was a source of living warmth against his chest. "I hope you appreciate that I drove like an old lady for you." He'd never forgive himself if Naya came to harm while in his care. A tiny panther head nudged the bottom of his chin. Scratching her under her own chin, he smiled. Truth was, it still hurt to see Naya, to hold her. She reminded him so much of Sky. His baby sister had been jaguar, not leopard, but she'd had the same mischievous spirit, the same affectionate sweetness. Vaughn might have been tempted to keep his distance from his best friend's cub, protect himself, but it was impossible. From the instant he'd picked her up after her birth, Nadia Shayla Hunter had owned a piece of his heart. "Yes, we're home," he said when she made questioning sounds. "Down. Stretch your legs." Placing her on the ground with careful hands, he watched as she got her shaky feet under her. Then she ran beside him while he walked at a pace slower than a sleepy 5-year-old's. Tail curled up in pride, Naya growled at all sounds from the forest, the big predator who was going to eat anything that dared encroach on her territory. Vaughn added his growls to hers, got an approving look in response. He'd left his jacket with the bike in preparation for his run, but Naya lasted longer than he'd expected. Finally exhausted, she permitted him to pick her up and hold her against his chest as he broke into a full-speed run, the tall firs of Yosemite passing by in a greenish-brown blur while beneath his booted feet, the grass was a lush green that sprang back after the feline lightness of his steps. Tiny claws dug into him, but he didn't censure her as he would have had she used them in play. She was just holding on. But she wasn't scared. Of course not. She was the daughter of an alpha. She was exhilarated. Slowing to a jog when he was almost home, he was down to a walk when he entered the cave system within which lay his lair. The scent he caught in the air made him grin, his jaguar rising to its feet inside him in wild welcome. "Hello, Red." Faith looked over from the sofa, where, clad in nothing but a short slip of a dress, she was eating a big bowl of cereal. "Naya!" Her delighted cry had Naya scrambling down to run over. Climbing up onto the sofa beside Faith through sheer grim effort augmented by a little help from Vaughn, she put her paws on the bare part of Faith's thigh and peered curiously at the bowl of cereal. Clearly deciding that the brightly colored flakes looked delicious, she licked out her tongue. Faith pulled the bowl out of reach just in time. "No, you don't. I am not getting in trouble with Lucas and Sasha by teaching you bad habits." Plopping down on her butt, Naya shifted and tugged at Faith's sea green dress while making sounds that might have been her name. "There you go." Faith fed Naya a spoonful after checking to make sure the cereal was soft enough with milk that it would be easy for her to eat. Vaughn watched Naya eat it up, then ask for more. She's hungry after shifting so much today. It took significant energy for the young, likely because their bodies were mid-development and because the shift did odd things at this age. Like giving Naya the cub far more dangerous teeth than Naya the toddler. I can't believe she's shifting. Faith fed their little guest more cereal. Yes, you are clever, she said, leaning down to kiss Naya on the cheek. And you're really hungry. Vaughn went into the kitchen area and found the box of cereal, as well as the milk. Putting both down on the small table beside Faith, he grabbed a throw to wrap around Naya so she wouldn't lose body heat. She's too little to regulate her temperature like we do ours, he told Faith when she looked up with a question in her eyes. So I should make sure she keeps the throw around her? For the next few minutes at least. He tugged on Naya's hair. Don't get cold, Miss Naya. He got an enthusiastic nod that made the lush black of her tumbled hair gleam under the simulated sunlight of his and Faith's lair. She'll be fine once she's settled into this form, he told his mate. Just touch her skin, make sure she's not chilled. Getting a nod of confirmation from Faith, he dropped a kiss on the fiery red of her hair. I'm going to shower off the sweat. She tipped up her head so that he could kiss her on the lips. Stroking his hand over the slender arch of her throat, he nipped at her lips, licked over the sensual hurt. Faith's hand was just coming up to cradle his jaw when Naya made a grab for the cereal bowl. Faye, she said, as if trying to get her tongue around Faith. Faith laughed, managed to steady the bowl. Yes, I know. Less kissing, more cereal. Naya clapped her hands. Quiche. That was clear enough, especially when she tipped up her head to Vaughn. Remembering Sky again, emotion a knot in his throat, Vaughn kissed the tip of her nose. Once. Twice. As Naya laughed, Faith lifted his hand, touched her lips to the back of it with a tenderness that said more than any words. He ran his knuckles over his mate's cheek before walking over to the shower, which looked like a waterfall cascading from the stone wall, a feat he'd gone to great lengths to achieve. Vaughn could hear his mate and his friend's cub talking animatedly as he stripped off and stepped under the water. Naya was so engaged that it sounded like a real, if largely incomprehensible on one side, conversation. The sounds made him chuckle, and this time, his memories of Sky were of when they'd been happy. She'd been just as chatty, talking his ear off about everything under the sun, including her favorite toys and flowers and how come the sun was yellow and the grass was green, and why did bees buzz. Her little face would screw up as she considered each question while waiting for his response. He'd often replied with nonsensical answers that made her laugh so hard she'd fall to the ground with her arms wrapped around her stomach. Grass is green because that's the color of insect poop. Bees buzz because they're really miniature jet choppers. Washing off the suds with a smile born of the memory of his sister's delight, he dried off, then pulled on a clean pair of jeans. He just grabbed a leftover slice of pizza for an afternoon snack when Faith got a call. She answered it, Naya busy amusing herself with a cardboard box that had once held a cutting tool Vaughn needed for his sculptures. Right now the box was on her head. His shoulders shook. Faith's own smile was deep as she spied Naya's antics, but when she spoke after hanging up, it was in a quiet tone. My father says Tanique is in town. Vaughn knew it was important to his mate to truly get to know her younger half-brother. They'd met, but only in passing. You want to go? Faith nodded. If we can. She gathered Naya into her lap when the little girl pushed off the box to yawn and rub at her eyes with her fists. Tanique's on a museum contract, so he's only in town tonight. I'll put on a shirt, take Naya so you can dress. We'll head out soon as you're ready. Faith looked down at the sleepy baby girl she was cuddling. She'd replaced the old throw with a soft pink blanket that Naya was rubbing her cheek against as she kneaded at it with a hand that had sprouted tiny claws. We don't have to rush that much. A whisper. I love holding her. Sitting down beside his mate, Vaughn stretched out an arm behind her. We could try to make a cub of our own. The idea of being responsible for a fragile new life was no longer scary now that he'd been around Naya for a year, been responsible for her countless times. He'd kept her safe. Faith's smile was shy, startled, happy. I'd like that. But not just yet. I'm still adjusting to the dark visions. Those visions came without warning, and could relate to anything from a major disaster to a murder to a small accident. Today. No, she leaned her head on his shoulder while continuing to pet Naya. Before we try for a child, I want to be confident that if I have a dark vision while I'm alone with our baby, I'll be able to ride it out. A glance up, her cardinal gaze stripped bare. I don't ever want to scare our child by reacting badly to a nightmare vision. No rush, Red. Vaughn nuzzled at her. Let her know he was with her. Always. We've got plenty of time yet. Plenty of years to play and grow together. We'll know when we're ready. Faith pressed a kiss over Naya's soft curls as Naya's eyes finally closed, thick, curling lashes throwing shadows over her cheeks. His mate had a gentle smile on her face when she looked up. Her lips parted as if she was about to speak, then snapped shut as her eyes widened. Red. Vaughn sat upright from his lazy sprawl. You having a vision? A shake of her head. My brother is a PSI, she blurted out. A strong one. 9 on the gradient. Blowing out a silent breath, he turned boneless again. Yeah, I know. What Vaughn didn't fully understand was how Tanique's psychometric ability worked. The younger man could sense things when he touched physical objects, that much was clear. But what exactly he saw, if he even had a visual component to his ability or whether he simply heard the echoes of sounds, Vaughn wasn't certain. The message in the bottle. Faith's voice was taut, intense. Can you get it back? It's really important. Realization dawned. Swinging his feet off the highly polished stump that acted as their coffee table, Vaughn got up. I don't know where Black Sea took it after we handed it over, but I know who to ask. Chapter 14. Vaughn left the room to make the call using the comm in Faith's workspace. As a DarkRiver sentinel, he had a contact number for Black Sea that was routed to whichever senior pack member was currently on shift as liaison. Today, that happened to be Malachi Reese. The big male listened to Vaughn's proposal, then connected him to Miena Levesque after a minute-long delay. Vaughn knew what Malachi had been doing in that minute when Miena appeared on the comm and began to speak without Vaughn having to explain anything. The bottle's in a lab on one of our floating cities, the Alpha said. I can pledge a Black Sea favor to get it to you via a teleport, but you tell me if I can trust this PSI. Vaughn was unsurprised by her wariness. Psi had long been the enemy of changelings, and even now, Vaughn himself only trusted a rare few. I can't give you an absolute guarantee, he responded. Tanique is Faith's brother, loyal to Nightstar. And Nightstar is headed by Anthony Kariakis, who has no love for the consortium. Wholesale chaos and violence was bad for the FSI, who were a vital part of Nightstar's power base, especially with so many of them now opening up to visions outside the antiseptic limits of business contracts. If there was one thing Vaughn knew about Anthony, it was that the other man protected his foreseers, including Faith, with a merciless will. On the flip side, he added, Tanique didn't grow up in Nightstar but with the maternal side of his family, so he may have loyalties we don't know about. Faith Nightstar was the one who suggested we ask her brother? Vaughn saw where Miena was going. Not a vision, he clarified. But she had a tone in her voice I've come to know. I'd never bet against her. I'd be a fool not to heed the advice of the best foreseer in the world. Miena put her hands on her hips, her cream-colored long-sleeved shirt moving with a fluidity that made Vaughn wonder if it was one of the experimental luxe fabrics Black Sea was famous for creating. We'll need the bottle within the next 2 to 3 hours, Vaughn reiterated. Miena's curt nod was a silent promise they'd have it. This is a massive risk on our part, Cat. Sometimes even sharks have to take a leap of faith. Miena's lips curved at the implied question about her changeling nature, but there was no humor in her eyes. I'll kill Tanique Gray if he betrays us. Vaughn knew that should Miena attempt to take such an action, he'd have to get in her way. His jaguar too would never forgive betrayal, but like him, Faith had already lost one sibling. Vaughn didn't think she could bear the loss of another, but he also had total conviction in his mate's abilities. Even when she didn't have a vision, Faith saw things. Like this morning, she'd insisted he wear his leather synth jacket when he absolutely hadn't intended to go out on the jet cycle today. If he'd refused to listen, he'd have had to return home to get it barely an hour later, after one of his packmates asked him for a favor that necessitated a trip to the city. And 3 days earlier, she called Tamsin to tell the healer about a deal she'd seen for good quality chocolate chips. I bought them, Tamsin had said to Vaughn when they ran into each other yesterday. Then today Roman comes home and reminds me I promised to make chocolate chip cookies for his and Jules's entire class after they finished a big project. I totally forgot. Would have had to scramble if Faith hadn't given me that tip. Small things, minuscule even, but they added up. I don't think you'll have to kill Tanique, he told Miena, but held her gaze so she'd know he was as big a predator as her. His dominance such that even Lucas couldn't make him do anything. Vaughn's jaguar chose to follow Lucas's panther because that panther had earned its respect and loyalty. Understand, he's family. Miena didn't blink. I suspect you and Malachi would get on well, she said before ending the call. Vaughn received a message 5 minutes later asking him to share teleport coordinates. I'll be back soon, he told Faith and grabbed his dirty t-shirt, which he'd thrown into the laundry basket. Running out of his lair, he went full tilt for 20 minutes, until he was surrounded by trees that all looked identical. He hung his tea, with its distinctive Celtic design on the front, from a branch. Then he took a photograph to send to Miena. It didn't surprise him in the least when the teleporter who appeared with a small storage box was a tall male dressed in arrow black. After his recent life-saving actions in bombings and disasters, Vasic had become famous worldwide. But Vaughn knew him from well before that. He hadn't been there the day this man with his winter-gray eyes brought in the medic who saved Dorian's life, but he'd heard the details from those who'd witnessed the incident. Without the help provided by the teleporter and that medic who the entire world now knew as a power, Vaughn's fellow sentinel and friend would be dead. "Thanks," he said, taking the box Vasic held out. "What did Miena promise you?" Vasic wasn't a commercial teleporter, so it wasn't as if Black Sea could have hired him. The other man's gaze was pure frost. "What has she promised you?" Vaughn bared his teeth. "Not a thing." He didn't think the arrow would respond, but Vasic said, "Life isn't always a cost-reward ratio. It's something the Psy long forgot. Some things we do in the name of friendship, or because it's the right thing to do." Vaughn had already liked this arrow who didn't back down in the face of a predator's challenge, but right then, he had the sense he might one day come to call Vasic a friend. 90 minutes later, Faith and Vaughn dropped a sleeping Naya off at Tamsin's place, where Sasha was having a meeting with the healer and a number of the pack's submissives. They then drove toward Tahoe in a high-speed vehicle. And now here Faith sat in a small conference room, her mate at her side, waiting for her father and her brother. She'd become accustomed to keeping her face impassive when walking into meetings with her father. Anthony had made it clear the charade that theirs was nothing but a business relationship that had to continue post-silence. Cyclan Nightstar might be powerful, but it had powerful enemies too. Anthony was a highly visible target. He refused to make Faith one when she'd successfully settled into a non-public life. "I've lost one child. No more." Faith remained at some risk because killing or even badly injuring her would significantly affect Nightstar's bottom line. However, that risk was nowhere near what it would be should Nightstar's enemies realize Anthony would strike terrible bargains to keep her safe. No outsider could ever know that Anthony Kariakis, head of Cyclan Nightstar, former Psy counselor, and current member of the ruling coalition, loved his children. Her father entered at that instant, a tall man with patrician features and black hair silvered at the temples, his expression the epitome of cool silence. "Vaughn." "Faith." Safe inside the windowless meeting room devoid of monitoring equipment, Faith hugged a man who had been too long in silence to easily show emotion. But his arms came around her, his scent familiar, and his voice deep as he said, "You're well." The simple, toneless question held such a weight of love that it made a knot form in her chest. Swallowing, she drew back to look up into his face. "Yes, father. I'm well." Scanning her face, Anthony said, "I see signs of strain." "I had a marathon session yesterday," she admitted. "Nothing dangerous." Vaughn was working nearby the whole time, and he made me take regular breaks. "I had to physically disrupt her trance," Vaughn muttered, his scowl in his voice. "Everything was flowing so beautifully, I wanted to keep going. But," she held up her hands when her father would have spoken, "I'm having a break today and tomorrow to recharge." Psychic power burned energy, but in the case of the darker visions of violence and murder and natural disasters, it was also viscerally draining. Such visions haunted her for weeks afterward. Thankfully, she hadn't seen anything too distressing of late. Only small warnings she'd been able to pass on so people could avoid bone-breaking accidents or personal catastrophes. "Faith." Anthony held her eyes with the brown of his, the charisma in his gaze potent. "I know you dislike the Tech 3 uplink chair you had in your cabin." Dislike is too weak a word. The tiny hairs on her arms rising in cold warning, Faith shifted back to stand with Vaughn. Her mate immediately wrapped one arm across the top of her chest to tug her against the muscled strength of his body. It was a silent promise. A deadly one too, should it be necessary. Air rushed back into her body, the painful tightness in her chest melting away. "I hate that chair." A full-length recliner shaped to her personal body contours. It had monitored and transmitted every breath she took while using it during the cold years she'd spent isolated in a one-person cabin. "You hated the intrusion, the fact that the data was fed to the medics," her father countered. "The chair itself would be invaluable to anyone who needs to monitor your well-being." His eyes went to Vaughn. The jaguar who belonged to Faith brushed his fingers over her collarbone. A DarkRiver cat calming his mate. "I don't need technology to make sure Faith is safe during her visions." "He really doesn't," Faith reassured her father. Despite her strong negative reaction to the idea of a Tech 3 uplinked recliner, she knew Anthony only wanted the best for her, that every action he'd ever taken in relation to his children had been to protect. Losing her half-sister Maureen to a psychopath had honed that protectiveness to a deadly edge. "I'm safe," she said. "I promise." She couldn't control the dark or wild visions, but she never went into a controlled one unless Vaughn was nearby. "I know the bond you two share is powerful," her father replied. "But Vaughn, you can't monitor every aspect of her health." Faith realized her father had no framework for understanding the beauty and intensity of the mating bond. Deciding not to push the point, she said, "Do you need to get rid of my old chair?" "No." Anthony's tone was so cool she felt chastened for her flip response. "We have 3 prototype next-generation recliners with top-of-the-line health monitoring functions, including a direct emergency link to a medic if your vitals drop below a certain point. I want you to have one." Faith's skin crawled at the idea of once again using a chair that spied on her. She opened her mouth to speak, but Vaughn beat her to it. "Give us a minute, Anthony." Her father left the room without further words, pulling the door shut behind himself. "I don't want that chair." Arms folded, Faith glared at her mate. "Red, you can turn off the monitoring functions, right?" She stayed stubbornly silent until Vaughn brushed his fingers over her jaw, in a caress that she knew came from the heart of his jaguar. "Yes," she admitted. "We can take out the chip, lobotomize it." "So," Vaughn cupped her cheek, ran his thumb over her cheekbone. "You accept your dad's gift. He's not the most warm and cuddly guy, but you're his little girl. He's just trying to look after you, same as Lucas does with Naya." Her lower lip trembled. She'd been so locked up inside the memories of how much she'd hated that chair that she'd forgotten why it had been created in the first place. So she'd be safe. "I love you." Vaughn's smile was pure feline smugness. "I know." She mock-punched him before opening the door to let her father back in. "I'll try the chair on a probationary basis. Too easy a capitulation would make Anthony suspicious. We'll also be disabling all broadcast functions. Any data it collects, which would be 0, will be kept strictly local to our home. I don't want to monitor you, Faith. I just want you to have all possible safeguards." Faith gave in and hugged her remote, dangerous, loving father again. "Thank you." He touched the back of her head before looking toward the door. A light knock came seconds later. Though the two of them drew apart, Anthony didn't speak or go to the door. When it opened, Faith realized he must have answered telepathically. No one in Nightstar would ever barge in on her father. "Sir." The 6-foot-tall young male who spoke was striking, with Anthony's patrician bones under mocha-colored skin, his hair black and tightly curled. He was a PSI, gifted in psychometry, and he was her younger brother. "Tanique," Anthony said. "You know your half-sibling Faith and her mate Vaughn D'Angelo." Tanique greeted Vaughn with a polite nod, but his attention was on Faith. "I've wanted to speak properly with you for a long time." "I feel the same." Faith reached out her hands before she remembered Tanique had been raised in silence, and unlike her, hadn't left the net to join a changeling pack where touch was an essential and everyday part of life. Any post-silence changes in her brother would be slow and hesitant. Dropping her hands, she said, "You're permanently at Nightstar now?" All adult Psi could choose the side of their family line with which they preferred to align themselves. Tanique had done it, not at 18 but later. Regardless, Anthony would have paid a penalty to the family who had raised and educated him, but would no longer have the benefit of his abilities. 30 was the point at which such considerations no longer applied. Tanique was barely 24 and a half. "Yes," he said. "Nightstar is my home base, though I do travel." Her brother continued to look at her with beautiful eyes of a pale tawny brown that made his face even more striking. They were almost feline, her brother's eyes, with fine striations of darker brown and yellow in the irises. Faith got the impression that he was as curious about her as she was about him. "My skill set meshes far better with Psi than with the telepathic abilities prevalent in my maternal line," he added in a voice that reminded her of Anthony's, only younger. "They didn't know quite how to make use of me, but father does. I do a little work for private collectors, but the bulk of what I do involves museums that wish to verify the provenance of exhibits or items the institutions wish to purchase." Faith shook her head, her pride in her brother a tidal wave of pressure against her heart. "That's not all you do," she corrected. "I know you've helped find more than one lost or kidnapped child." Tanique didn't blink or shift position, but she caught a subtle change in his expression. "Father's taught me that we aren't only machines bound to our gifts." A glance at their shared father that held unhidden respect. "Yes, we need to support ourselves, but we can also choose to use our abilities in ways that are good for society. And for our spirits," he finished hesitantly. At that instant, Faith saw only a younger brother still struggling to find his footing. Not the gifted PSI who'd once carried a child a mile out of a dense jungle after picking up a lost backpack and catching a glimpse of where the child's abductor had taken him. Choosing to do the right thing can be hard at times, she said softly. But it's worth it. The dark visions used to leave her crumpled in a fetal ball until she accepted them as part of her gift and took ownership. Now sometimes she saved a life. Against that, the intense psychic control, the pain of living a murderer's dreams, none of it mattered. Tanique gave a nod so like Anthony's that Faith bit back a smile. For all his poise and training, her brother suddenly put her in mind of the youths in DarkRiver. Adorable. He'd probably hate that description had he embraced emotion, but she thought an older sister should have leave to think such things. I was actually hoping to ask your help with something. I'd be happy to provide it. His reply came so quickly on the heels of her words that she realized he wanted to build a relationship with her as badly as she wanted to build one with him. You have an object for me to look at? Faith gestured to the box on the table. It's in there. Can you take a look, see what you sense? It was a deliberately vague statement on her part. She didn't want to influence him in any way. Can you open the box? Tanique's tone was more sure now that they were in his area of expertise. It's so I don't get sidetracked by any impressions left on the box by those who've carried it. I should have thought of that. Once she'd opened the box, Tanique simply looked at the barnacle-encrusted bottle for a long minute before he reached in and lifted it out, while being careful not to brush so much as his knuckles against the inside of the box. The letter had been deemed too fragile for handling, but Miena had sent a small piece from it that had broken off during the original transit. A blank corner, the paper was protected inside a small plastic sleeve. Tanique left it in the box for now. His first words came bare seconds after he touched the bottle. Youth, curiosity, a feline energy, cold anger. A surface layer only, likely from the people who handled it over the past few days. Faith didn't interrupt, though she was impressed by how quickly and accurately he'd picked up all that. The sea, he murmured, running his fingers over the barnacles. I can hear its crashing whisper in my mind. But you don't need me to tell you this bottle was in the ocean. He angled his head to the right, as if struggling to hear a faraway voice. He murmured. There are long-ago echoes here from decades ago. Of an elderly man cleaning the bottle. But there's a new deep imprint, too. A girl. No, a woman. A young woman held this not recently but recently enough, and for long enough that the imprint hasn't faded. When he looked at Faith, she had to bite back a gasp. She'd seen Psy's eyes turn black. Her own did that during a surge of emotion, or when she was using large amounts of psychic power. She'd also seen the colors in Sasha's eyes when she was using her empathic abilities. But this she'd never seen. Tanique's irises had taken on a shimmer of pale green, as if reflecting the bottle. She was afraid but fierce. Hurt. Squeezing shut his eyes, he lowered his head, only to shake it after 30 seconds. That's all I get. It wasn't as much as Faith had hoped, but it was fascinating to see her brother at work. Thanks for trying. I don't think anyone but the old man spent great amounts of time with the bottle. Eyes ordinary now. He looked at the plastic sleeve that held the piece of paper. May I? Faith nodded. She knew the water changelings wouldn't have offered the piece to a PSI if they didn't expect it to be touched. While her brother's specialty was esoteric and not well known outside of museums, and some crime departments who'd been able to secure the services of a PSI, most people could connect the dots. This time he didn't have to tell her to open the bag for him. Unsealing it, she shook the piece of paper straight out onto his palm. Tanique's spine snapped straight, his jaw going rigid. Pain, he said. Anger again. More pain. Anguish. Faith saw her brother's other hand fist at his side, and had the startling realization that to be a PSI was to be bombarded by emotion. How had her brother survived silence? It was a question she'd ask him one day, when they were alone and he didn't feel so overwhelmed. The young woman who touched the bottle, she handled this paper on a boat. His breathing grew ragged as his body swayed from side to side, as if he were on a boat himself. The boat rocked. But not for long. She was frantic to get the paper away before it was too late, and they reached land again. Home, she was thinking of home the last time she touched this. Releasing the paper so it floated down to lie inside the box, he opened his eyes. Faith went to say thank you, but Tanique wasn't done. I have fragments of what she saw, he said. A glimpse of what might be part of a wall, an image of her toes, what looks like a chain attached to a wrist. Another deep breath. His expression difficult to read but his body vibrating with tension. An old sign, chipped white paint on graying wood, Edwards Pier. Apostrophe before the S in Edwards. Worn wooden boards under her feet, water below. And that's it. I've got it, Vaughn murmured. His phone already in hand as he messaged Black Sea the details Tanique had given them. Faith reached out a hand toward her brother. Thank you. Only a small hesitation before Tanique put his hand in hers. I'm sorry I couldn't be of more assistance. She's in trouble, isn't she? Yes, and you helped. The sign he'd picked up was a highly specific detail. I didn't really understand until I watched you work, but our abilities are on the same continuum. I don't know why they're not listed together in the designation charts. She frowned in an effort to find the words to say what she meant. We both see what isn't there. In my case, I see what will be, while you see what has been. Tanique blinked. And his fingers, they seemed to curl further around hers. Perhaps we should write a paper arguing the case. I think we should. Faith smiled at the excuse to spend more time getting to know her brother. Do you have to go yet? We could head outside for a while, talk. But Tanique shook his head. Since I'm officially part of Nightstar, it's not safe for you to be connected to me in a non-business context. Disappointment was lead in her gut. Oh, of course. Vaughn prowled over. How about you two meet in DarkRiver's home territory? No prying eyes there. Faith didn't bother to hide her delight when Tanique agreed at once. Tanique, Anthony said after Faith and Vaughn finished giving Tanique their direct contact details so he could get in touch when he had a day off. Your transport is here. A piercing look. Be very careful. Your ability is rare enough that no one has truly worked out your vulnerabilities, but you're a Nightstar. Don't let down your guard. Yes, sir. Tawny brown eyes met Faith's. I hope to see you again soon. Faith just did it. She hugged him. He froze, didn't respond. But neither did he push her away, and that was enough for today. I can't wait. Anthony waited until Tanique was gone to speak. I'll have the chair delivered to DarkRiver's HQ. Thank you, Father. Then, prodded by the silent mischief in the eyes of the jaguar who was her mate, she said, Is Counselor Duncan well? Anthony's response was icy. You should get going, or you won't arrive home until the early hours of the morning. The faintest touch of his hand to her hair before he was gone. Vaughn held it together until they were in the car, and on their way to a casual restaurant for a late-night snack. Your father and Nikita. Man likes to live dangerously. Faith shot virtual daggers at the highly amused cat next to her. He was so mad. No, he was just telling his daughter to mind her own business. I would have if you hadn't been egging me on. She fiddled with the edge of the simple white top she wore with jeans and ankle boots. Do you think they really are? In a relationship? Faith could imagine her father loving a woman, but Nikita? Sasha's mom is. A cold, heartless bitch? Vaughn supplied before adding, they do have one thing in common. What? Both would kill for their kids. Faith nodded slowly, though she continued to find it difficult to imagine how a relationship between two such icily controlled people could work, and which one of them would bend in any particular situation when both were used to ruling their domains with iron hands. As for physical intimacy, she shuddered, banishing those thoughts far, far from her mind. Quiet, she ordered when her mate chuckled with a knowing glint in his eye. Shall we go see Mercy tomorrow afternoon since you'll be off shift? Vaughn's thigh bunched under the hand she'd placed on it. No. She'll just complain about exploding any day soon. It was a bad-tempered growl. I've never seen a woman be so bad at pregnancy. It's only been the last few weeks, when she can't be as active as usual. Even Mercy's sentinel-fit body had said enough at that point. You know she'd like the company, and I know you miss her now that you don't run into her on patrol. Vaughn growled again but muttered that he'd stop by a bakery and pick up Mercy's favorite upside-down pineapple cake. Faith smiled, wondering if they could steal Naya again and take her along on the visit. But her smile faded as she considered what had happened tonight. You think Tanique's reading will help? Edward's Pier doesn't sound like an official name, Vaughn said. If it was put up on private land, it won't be easy to find. He shrugged, the movement quintessentially feline. But it's a whole lot more than Black Sea had before. Golden eyes locked with hers for a primal heartbeat. Now we see how well they hunt. Letters to Nina. From the private diaries of Father Xavier Perez. March 22, 2074. Nina. I keep writing these letters knowing they'll die with me, but I can't stop. You're the one to whom I always told my secrets. Now I have another one. I spoke to a man in the bar 5 minutes ago. Not a man. A soldier. A sigh. Like the ones who came to our village, came to annihilate because we refused to allow them to strangle all trade in the region, cutting us off from our livelihoods. The only difference is that this Psy looks even more dangerous. I drank tequila and I told him about the murderous evil of his people. He thought I was drunk, that I didn't know to whom I spoke. He was wrong. I can see him still from my new position in the very back of the bar. He's waiting for whoever it is he's come to see. Dressed in civilian clothing, he's trying to blend in, is fooling most people, but I know the way Psy soldiers walk and I know the way their eyes scan a room. I'm going to kill him. I can hear you in my head, telling me not to commit this mortal sin, but the drink and the blood and the grief have washed away my faith. All I want is vengeance. If I can't get the men and women who took you from me, took everyone I ever loved away from me, then I'll take their brethren. Xavier. Chapter 15. Mercy and the always ravenous pup cubs were having a good couple of days. Not only had Vaughn and Faith brought cake and news and Naya yesterday, today Mercy and the football team inside her were getting all kinds of delicious. As for Naya and her pride in being able to shift, adorable didn't begin to describe it. Far more mobile in her leopard form, Mercy had shifted too, and played gentle games with her alpha's cub. Because pregnant or not, she could still shift. Scientists had been trying to figure out the whys of that particular trick for centuries, but so far, all anyone could say was that because a changeling was meant to be both forms, a pregnant changeling who shifted also took control of the cells of her embryo or fetus and shifted that embryo or fetus with her. Despite that, Mercy had worried about shifting the first time after she found out she was pregnant, because it was possible the pup cubs weren't built to shift into the same animal as her. But not only had Lara and Tamsin both reassured her nothing would go wrong, she'd known that not shifting would cause far more harm to her, and thus to her pup cubs. She'd shifted. And the pup cubs had continued to grow, happy in either form. Yesterday, she'd been certain she could feel their delight as Faith and Vaughn played with Naya alongside Mercy. Her jaguar packmate had taken his animal form, while a barefoot Faith had happily tumbled in the grass with Naya. Then Riley had returned from a run to get Mercy something she'd been craving. He joined in and the day had turned from almost perfect to perfect. Especially given Naya's deliriously excited reaction every time she saw Riley in his wolf form. She seemed to think he was a living version of the toy that shall not be named and pounced on him without fail. Once before Mercy and Riley moved down to this cabin, while they had been babysitting, Mercy had come out of their home to find her mate on the grass in wolf form, snoozing in the sun, while Naya did the same curled up on his back, one little hand fisted possessively in his fur. The image had slayed her, her knees going so weak she'd had to sit down on the steps leading down from their veranda, and just watch the two of them as they dozed. Then yesterday, seeing how patient he was with Naya's antics, Mercy blew out a breath. God, her sexy, quietly stable wolf mate was going to be one hell of a father. To top it all off, she had a genuine task in putting together the DarkRiver Snow Dancer event. She knew Lucas had assigned her the job to keep her busy and stop her from driving Riley crazy, but though she made growly noises at Lucas and Hawk both when they asked her how it was going secretly, she was enjoying it. A sentinel wasn't meant to sit around. She was meant to do. At least neither her alpha nor her fellow sentinels tried to shield her from bad news, such as the developing Black Sea situation, and the possible threat to Naya. Mercy had helped Jamie and Detsy rejig the communications aspect of DarkRiver security protocols when it came to the Pax Cubs, was certain that between the three of them, they'd plugged any possible gaps. She'd also racked her brain thinking of how either pack could assist the captive Layla Savia, but right now she had nothing. What she could do was help nurture the ever-growing bond between DarkRiver and Snowdancer. In their blood alliance was a strength that wouldn't only shield the packs from the bastards who hid in the shadows pulling strings designed to cause as much chaos as possible. It could well lead to the downfall of those same assholes. Most important to her on a personal level was that the blood bond between the two packs meant her pup cubs would grow up in a cohesive single entity, with two independent parts. See, babies, she said, patting her hard belly. You're already a force for peace among mankind, or at least among a bunch of stubborn wolves and leopards. You talking to yourself again, Merce? Her brother yelled out from the kitchen where she had him prisoner. Shut up and cook, Frenchie. Bastien poked his head out the door, the dark red of his hair as pretty as the green eyes that made him such a favorite with the women. Too bad for them that he was head over heels for his sweetheart of a mate, who was just as loopy over him. Loopy enough to take Mercy on. Since Mercy would have accepted no woman who didn't fight for Bess, she loved Kirby. Bastien's sweetheart came with a spine. I thought pregnancy was supposed to make you soft and glowy and smooshy. Smooshy. She threw a wadded-up piece of paper at his handsome head. Is that even English? Throwing up a hand, he caught the paper in midair. I pick up Kirby after work sometimes, and if she's still got kids in the kindergarten because the parents have been held up, we hang out. Apparently Ushi can be attached to most words. He pointed a large wooden spoon at her belly, his white t-shirt and black cargo pants partially covered by a sleek black apron. You should know that since you'll be hearing words like it very soon. Mercy smiled. Comere punto. Her big, burly brother immediately looked suspicious. Why? He asked, not moving from the doorway. I'm the size of a tank and slow as a drunk bear. I'm not going to bite you. Mercy crooked a finger. Eyebrows drawn together, Bastien came to where she sat in the large armchair Riley had moved to the end of the dining table. Papers and a thin organizer were spread out in front of her. When she waved Bias down, his expression darkened even further, but he bent toward her. She put a hand on his muscled shoulder and kissed him on the cheek. His scent so familiar that she was sure she felt the pup cubs squirm in happiness at having their uncle so close. Bastien rose to his feet, his suspicious expression having transformed into full-blown accusation. What do you want me to cook now? Cherry pie with your special crust. Cherry pie. Bastien glared at her. Do you know how much work it is to get that crust exactly right? And I'll have to go get the cherries. Mercy gave him her best. I'm pregnant with multiples smile. I love you. Gore. Putting a hand on her hair, Bastien leaned down again and pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'll make you your pie after I finish the casserole you wanted for lunch. Smiling as he went back into the kitchen, Mercy patted her belly again. Yes, Uncle Bastien is the best. Stop sucking up, her brother growled from the kitchen. I'm making the damn pie. Mercy laughed and picked up the old-fashioned notepad on which she was jotting down ideas for the joint event. Officially, it was to welcome the pup cubs, but Mercy knew that was just an excuse. It was time. DarkRiver and Snowdancer had gone from wary neighbors to wary allies to true allies to blood-bonded friends who'd lay down their lives for one another without hesitation. While they'd never be one pack, their animals too different, they were as close to it as possible. This celebration was about acknowledging that. Planning a social event wouldn't usually be a task assigned to a sentinel, and it wasn't anything at which Mercy was an expert, but she wasn't doing this alone. Riley was better at this kind of thing. Despite being as aggressive a dominant as Mercy, he'd also long been in charge of Snowdancer's overall personnel. His experience at organizing a whole bunch of snarly wolves into some sort of order translated surprisingly well into breaking down the manpower required for a large event. He'd done just that last night, while she did a few exercises with him playing spotter. And scowling. Her lips quirked. Poor Riley. Ending up with a mate who refused to sit still and let him take care of her. Her gorgeous wolf didn't realize she was taking care of him too. The last thing Riley needed was peace and quiet. Give him time to think, and his worry for her went into hyperdrive. I'm amazed at your patience, Indigo had said to her a month ago, the wolf lieutenant's eyes curious. I'd have expected you to have clawed him bloody by now for his overprotectiveness. Mercy had promised Indigo a clawing was on the horizon, but the truth was that Riley had earned his right to worry. That massive heart of his? It loved so fiercely that it held nothing back, maintained no protections against hurt. For a man like that, she could give a little, except what he needed to do to keep himself on an even keel. Quite aside from her wolf, Mercy had 2 packs of helpers at her disposal when it came to organizing this event. Plus, thanks to Riley, she knew approximately how many people she needed for each task. Bah. Yeah. You up for doing some catering for the... And oh no. But you're an amazing cook. I'm a genius in charge of DarkRiver's financial assets, not your personal chef slave. She grinned because, grumpy as he sounded, her brother had taken time out of his genuinely busy day, because he was a financial genius, to come hang out with her. The food was just an excuse. This was about family. Is Kirby okay with you being here today? Bastien and Kirby hadn't been mated long, were understandably possessive of one another. Are you kidding? She loves the pup cubs. He poked his head out of the kitchen again. I think she still occasionally worries about the fact that she's a lynx and I'm a leopard. The pup cubs reassure her that's not and never will be an issue. Mercy knew her sister-in-law well enough to guess what lay at the root of her fears. Just love her. Kirby had been alone for a long time. She was packed now and understood that she belonged, but a little extra affection would help cement that realization. I love her until my heart hurts. Bastien's expression softened. She's smart, sexy, funny, perfect. I just threw up a little in my mouth. Mercy pretended to gag. Wasn't fast enough to dodge or catch the cushion Bastien grabbed from the closest sofa to throw at her. It hit her in the chest with so little momentum she knew he'd been purposefully gentle. All 3 of her hooligan brothers had reverted to type now she was pregnant. Protective DarkRiver dominance. You'd think they'd never pushed her into a mud pool or 5, or tripped her up, or played hard-out football with her complete with bruising tackles. Of course, she hadn't been innocent of hooliganism herself. In fact, she might have pushed Ba and Sage into a mud pool first. Grinning at the thought of her own children playing rough and tumble games with each other, she said, Is your lynx coming over after work? I've messaged to let her know you need another kitchen slave so she'll be roped into cherry pie prep. A deep smile. She said she'll pick up the supplies on the way. Did I tell you I adore your mate? She is highly adorable. Laughing at the smug cat look on his face, Mercy went back to her plans while Bastien busied himself in the kitchen. The first problem was location. Usually when DarkRiver held such gatherings, it was in the pack circle. Snowdancer had a comparative space up in their territory. DarkRiver was a much smaller pack, and as such had a smaller central gathering space. However, Snowdancer's celebration area was in the Sierra Nevada, and at a higher elevation. If the event was to be held soon after the birth, then Mercy and the pup cubs would have to travel to that elevation. The babies might feel like linebackers inside her, but they'd be very small at that stage and she didn't want to shock their little bodies. It would have been different were they to be born in the Sierra Nevada, but they'd be born in DarkRiver's Yosemite territory. She wanted them stronger before taking them up. Any wolves who wanted to visit would be welcome in DarkRiver lands. Tapping a finger on the dining table, she picked up her phone to contact Riley. Her mate was worried she'd go into labor while he wasn't with her. Had only reluctantly left to run an errand for Snowdancer. Mercy couldn't argue with his concern. Most changeling multiples were already born by this stage of the pregnancy. He'd given the pup cubs strict instructions to stay put while their daddy was away. Mercy could almost feel them listening as he spoke, had full faith they'd behave, because she was not having them without Riley next to her. The end. Location for party? She messaged him. Dear circle is too small, and I don't want to switch elevations on the pup cub so soon after birth. Pup cubs are half wolf, Riley responded. They won't mind. That was a good point. Regardless of what their babies chose to shift into, they had Riley's genes as well as her own. And Riley was built for the higher elevations, barely felt the cold. He was also tough, gorgeously sexy with those big shoulders, and that wall of a body that could take anything she could dish out. Mercy pressed her thighs together. I want to pounce on you. Your pregnancy hormones are going to kill us both. And we'll die happy. She giggled, slapped a hand over her mouth before Bess heard and grew curious. What about the area around our place? Riley sent. She knew he wasn't talking about this cabin. He was referring to their permanent home, a home that was part Swiss chalet, part rugged mountain cabin. It'll also mean an elevation change, she replied, but not such a big one. And it's where the older teens and early 20s group had their New Year's party. A successful effort to get that age group talking to one another across pack lines. Only problem is I'm not sure there's enough open space. Mercy considered Riley's point. Cutting down trees wasn't an option. No changeling would ever damage the environment for such a fleeting reason. We could use our house and the land around it as the focus and people could spread out into the trees. Close to the house, those trees weren't packed so tightly together that it would make mingling difficult. We have enough open space for dancing and for the kids to play. Riley agreed before messaging. I'll be home in a couple of hours. You good? Getting fatter by the minute but otherwise happy. So are the pup cubs. He sent her back a whole bunch of hearts. She melted. Senior Snowdancer Lieutenant Riley Kincaid did not message little pink hearts. Saving the message, she hugged the phone to her chest for a moment before messaging back some hearts of her own. She added puppies, because she could be goofy and mushy with her mate. He wouldn't see her as any less strong. Positively buoyant afterward, she sketched out several more ideas. A temporary dance floor, maybe backlit, was a definite, as were pretty lights in the trees. Beside each point, she jotted down names of packmates and snowdancers who'd be good at actioning it. Riley could help with the latter when he got back. Food, of course, lots of it. Everyone could pitch in there. Despite her teasing of Bastien, bringing food to share at a pack event was pretty standard in both DarkRiver and Snowdancer. Bah. Yup. Should we get a special cake? What? Half wolf, half cat, all danger. She knew he was messing with her, but she liked the idea. That'd be fun. The pups and cubs would love it. Mercy stroked her belly when she paused in her work. Space was at a premium in there. The recent scans Tamsin had taken showed the pup cubs wrapped around each other like living pretzels. A foot in someone's face, an arm under a chin, other creative ways of making the most of limited space. It's almost time, she whispered to them. Your daddy and I can't wait to hold you in our arms. Even as her lips curved in joy and wonder, part of her mind continued to think of the darkness licking at the edges of the world, of the growing threat to a small panther cub, and of a woman trapped far from home. When the Trinity Accord was first proposed, she'd hoped her pup cubs would be born into a world at peace. Today she accepted that it was going to be a far more complicated and far longer process.